My daughter's voice came through the heating vent in my study, low and careful, the way people talk when they think a wall is thick enough to keep a secret. "He's getting worse, Derek. The doctor said the fall could have been a lot worse than it was. If we don't do this now, while he's still willing to sign things, we might not get another chance." I sat very still in my armchair, the newspaper open on my lap, and listened to my own daughter discuss my future like I was a piece of furniture that needed to be moved before it fell over on its own. "The Pine Ridge facility has an opening in 3 weeks, Derek said. If we get his signature on the power of attorney this weekend, we can list the house before the market cools off in the fall. Your dad's not going to fight us on this, Claire. He trusts you." I set the newspaper down slowly, my hands steadier than I expected them to be, and I thought about my late wife, Margaret, and what she would have said if she'd heard our only daughter planning to empty out the house we'd raised her in, 3 months after a single stumble on the porch steps that hadn't even required a hospital visit. I had built this life carefully. I was 71 years old, a retired postal supervisor, sound of mind, sound enough to balance my own checkbook and drive myself to church every Sunday without incident. I had raised Claire alone for the better part of 2 years while Margaret fought the cancer that eventually took her, and I had believed, foolishly perhaps, that the girl I'd carried through that darkness would be the last person on earth to try and take something from me. I didn't confront them that night. I sat in my study long after they'd left, staring at the vent in the floor like it might have more to tell me, and I made a decision that would change everything that followed. I decided I wasn't going to be a man things simply happened to anymore. I was going to find out exactly what my daughter and her husband were planning, and I was going to be ready for it before they ever got the chance to put a pen in my hand. I had no idea, that night, just how far Claire and Derek had already gotten, or how close I'd come to losing everything without ever understanding what had actually happened to me. The trouble had started small, the way trouble in families usually does. 6 weeks earlier, I'd slipped on the second porch step carrying a bag of mulch, twisted my ankle, and spent one uncomfortable night in the emergency room getting an X-ray that came back clean. A sprain, nothing more. I was walking without a cane within 4 days. But something about that fall had changed the way Claire looked at me. She started calling more often, asking questions that sounded like concern but felt, even then, like inventory. Was I still driving at night? Was I keeping up with the yard work myself, or had I hired anyone? Did I ever forget to take my blood pressure medication? I answered honestly each time, because I had nothing to hide and no reason yet to suspect I needed to. It was Derek who brought up the idea of getting some paperwork in order, just in case, at a Sunday dinner 3 weeks after the fall. He framed it as responsible planning, the kind any sensible man my age should have handled years ago. A general power of attorney, he explained, just so Claire could step in smoothly if anything ever happened to me. I remember nodding along, because on its face, it sounded like the kind of prudent, loving thing a family does for each other. I didn't yet understand that Derek had already spoken to a realtor about my house 2 weeks before that dinner ever happened. My grandson Tyler was the one who first made me uneasy, though he didn't mean to. Tyler was 19, home from his second year at the state university, and he'd always been closer to me than either of his parents seemed entirely comfortable with. He came by one afternoon while Claire and Derek were out, and somewhere between helping me clean the gutters and drinking too much lemonade on the back porch, he mentioned, almost in passing, that his parents had been looking at listings for one-bedroom condos near the university. They said something about downsizing, Tyler told me, not thinking much of it. I figured they meant their own place. They've been talking about it for a while now. I didn't correct him. I didn't yet know enough to correct him. But something in the back of my mind filed that detail away, the way you file away a loose thread you haven't yet realized is attached to something much bigger. It was 2 nights later that I overheard the conversation through the heating vent, and everything Tyler had mentioned in passing suddenly stopped sounding like an innocent detail about condos near the university. I called my oldest friend the next morning. Walter Prentice and I had worked together at the post office for over 20 years, and after his own wife passed, he'd gone back to school in his 60s and finished the law degree he'd abandoned as a young man. He specialized, these days, in exactly the kind of elder law matters I suddenly and urgently needed to understand. "Edward," he said, once I'd laid out everything I'd overheard, "I want you to listen to me very carefully. What you're describing, if it's true, has a name. It's called elder financial exploitation, and it happens more often inside families than most people ever want to admit. The fact that it's your own daughter doesn't make it any less serious under the law. I don't want to destroy my family over a conversation I overheard through a heating vent," I told him. "Maybe I misunderstood something." "Then let's find out for certain before you sign anything," Walter said. "Don't refuse the power of attorney outright, that will only tip them off that you know something. Stall. Tell them you want your own attorney to look it over first, which is completely reasonable and expected. And in the meantime, Edward, I want you documenting everything. Every conversation, every visit, every mention of that facility or that house. If this is what it sounds like, you're going to need more than your own memory to prove it." I bought a small digital recorder from an electronics shop 2 towns over, paying in cash, because some instinct told me I didn't want a purchase like that showing up anywhere Claire might see it. I started keeping it in my shirt pocket every time she or Derek came to visit, and I started keeping a small notebook by my bed, writing down dates and details the moment they left, while everything was still fresh. The first real evidence came 10 days later, when Claire arrived alone on a Tuesday afternoon with a folder of documents and a pen already clicked open, the way a salesman arrives with the contract half signed in his own mind before he's even said hello. "I talked to an attorney friend of Derek's," she said, sliding the folder across my kitchen table, the same table where she'd once done her 3rd grade homework. "It's a general power of attorney. Standard stuff, Dad. It just means I can help manage things if you ever need it. You don't even have to think about it right now, just sign here and we'll file it away." "I'd like my own attorney to look it over first," I said, keeping my voice easy, the way Walter had coached me. "You understand, sweetheart. A man my age ought to be careful about signing legal documents without a second opinion. I raised you to be careful about exactly that kind of thing." Something flickered across Claire's face, gone almost as quickly as it appeared, but I caught it, and the recorder in my pocket caught it too. "Dad, this isn't complicated. Derek's friend drew it up specifically to be simple and fast. Getting another attorney involved is just going to slow everything down and cost money we don't need to spend." "Then a few more days won't hurt anything," I said. "I'll have an answer for you by the weekend." She left annoyed, more annoyed than the situation seemed to warrant if this really was, as she kept insisting, simple and routine. I sat back down at that kitchen table once her car pulled out of the driveway, and I played the recording back twice, listening for anything I might have missed the first time. There it was, near the end, low enough that I'd almost missed it live, Claire, muttering to herself as she gathered her things, "This would be so much easier if he'd just trust me." Trust. As if trust was the obstacle standing between her and my house. 3 days later, I drove out to the realty office on Main Street myself, on the pretense of asking about property values in the neighborhood for my own estate planning. The young agent behind the desk, a friendly woman named Priscilla, pulled up recent listings without a second thought, and mentioned, almost as an aside, that a Derek Halloway had come in 6 weeks earlier asking about the process for listing a property still occupied by a family member, and about typical timelines for an estate sale versus a standard sale. 6 weeks earlier. Before the fall on the porch steps had even happened. I drove home that afternoon with my hands tight on the steering wheel, the full shape of it finally becoming clear to me. This hadn't started with concern over my safety. It had started, as far as I could tell, well before the fall gave them a convenient excuse to move faster. Derek had been laying groundwork for selling my house months before anyone ever mentioned a power of attorney, months before anyone had a real reason to worry about my well-being at all. I called Walter that evening and told him everything. "You need more than a suspicious visit to a realty office," he said. "That alone could be explained away as innocent curiosity, and a good attorney will make sure it sounds that way in front of a judge if it ever comes to that. What you need is direct evidence of intent, evidence that they were planning to use documents you signed under pressure, or under false pretenses about your competency, to move forward with selling your home without your genuine, informed consent. How do I get that? I asked. You let them think they're winning, Walter said. For now. Sign nothing yet, but stop resisting quite so hard. Let them believe you're softening. People who think they've already won tend to stop being careful about what they say. I followed his advice, and it cost me more than I expected it to, pretending to soften toward a plan I now understood was built on a lie. I told Claire, the following weekend, that I'd thought it over and I was willing to consider the power of attorney, provided we discussed the specific terms together, as a family, at dinner. She brightened immediately, relief and something else, satisfaction, maybe, moving across her face in a way that made my chest ache more than the ankle sprain ever had. I knew you'd come around, Dad, she said. You've always been reasonable about this stuff. Reasonable. That word sat wrong with me the same way trust had. I wondered, not for the first time, when exactly my daughter had started thinking of my reasonableness as something to be managed rather than respected. The dinner happened the following Friday. Tyler was there too, home again for the weekend, sitting between his parents with the particular discomfort of a young man who senses tension in a room without yet understanding its source. I'd made sure the recorder was in my shirt pocket, and I'd made sure, this time, to steer the conversation somewhere specific. I've been thinking about the house too, I said, midway through the meal, watching Claire's face carefully. Maybe it does make sense to think about downsizing eventually. What would the timeline even look like, if we did decide to sell? Derek answered before Claire could, eager in a way that told me everything Walter had predicted. Honestly, the market's strong right now, so if we got the power of attorney squared away this weekend, we could probably have it listed within 2 or 3 weeks. Pine Ridge has that opening coming up too, so the timing would actually work out really well for everybody. Derek, Claire said, a warning edge creeping into her voice, glancing toward Tyler. What? Derek said, oblivious, or perhaps simply too far into the momentum of his own plan to notice he was saying too much. It's not like it's a secret, Claire. We've been talking about this for weeks. Your dad already said he's on board tonight. Tyler set his fork down slowly. Wait, he said. Pine Ridge, like the assisted living place. Are you guys talking about moving Grandpa out of his house? The table went quiet in the particular way a table goes quiet when something has been said that wasn't supposed to be said yet, not like this, not in front of everyone at once. We're just exploring options, sweetheart, Claire said, her voice gone brittle. Nothing's decided. This is exactly why I wanted to handle the details privately, without everyone getting worked up prematurely. You told me you were talking about your own condo, Tyler said, looking between his parents now, something hardening in his young face. You let me think you guys were the ones downsizing. Were you lying to me? Tyler, this isn't the time, Derek said. It seems like exactly the time, I said quietly, and every eye at the table turned toward me. Since apparently everyone's known about this plan except me, until 3 weeks ago, and apparently my own grandson's known longer than I have, in one form or another. Claire's composure cracked for just a moment, something raw and defensive rising up underneath it. Dad, I am doing this because I love you and I am worried about you living alone in this big house at your age. After the fall, I couldn't stop thinking about what would happen if you fell again and nobody found you for hours. Is it so wrong that I want you somewhere safe? It might not be wrong, I said carefully, if that's actually what this was about. But your husband was talking to a realtor about listing this house 6 weeks before I ever fell on that porch step, Claire. Explain that to me, if this is only about my safety. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd heard in that dining room in years. Derek tried to recover the room, his voice taking on the same overly patient tone he used when he thought someone simply didn't understand the facts. Edward, that visit to the realtor was just due diligence. Preliminary research. It doesn't mean anything was decided. Then why, I said, reaching into my shirt pocket and setting the small recorder on the table between us. Does this recording have Claire saying, quote, "If we don't do this now, while he's still willing to sign things, we might not get another chance, 3 weeks before that dinner where you first mentioned the power of attorney to me as though it were simply a new idea." The color drained out of Claire's face so fast I nearly regretted it, nearly wanted to reach across the table and take it all back, tell her I'd misunderstood, tell her none of it mattered. But then I thought of Margaret, and the life we'd built in this house together, and I made myself sit still and let the silence stretch out instead. "You've been recording us?" Claire finally said, her voice thin with something between fury and humiliation. "I've been protecting myself," I said. "Because apparently that's a thing I needed to start doing, in my own family, at 71 years old." Tyler stood up from the table, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I can't believe this," he said, looking at his parents like he was seeing them clearly for the first time. "You were trying to put Grandpa in a home and sell his house behind his back, while pretending it was about his safety?" "Tyler, sit down," Derek said. "You don't understand the whole situation." "I understand plenty," Tyler said. "I understand you were talking to a realtor before Grandpa even fell. I understand you let me believe a lie for weeks. I understand you were planning to take his signature before he even had time to think it through with his own lawyer. That's not confusing, Dad. That's just wrong." Claire's hands were shaking now, and for the first time all evening, something in her expression shifted from defensiveness towards something that looked almost like fear, I think, of what this dinner had just become, of what it might mean for everyone at that table going forward. "I never wanted it to be like this," she said quietly, mostly to me now, the anger draining out of her voice and leaving something more exhausted behind it. "I got scared after the fall, Dad. I really did. And then Derek started talking about timelines and money and I let myself get carried along by it because it was easier than sitting with how scared I actually was." "Being scared doesn't excuse lying to your own father about why a realtor was already involved," I said. "It doesn't excuse trying to get my signature on something before I had the chance to have my own attorney review it. Fear explains a first mistake, Claire. It doesn't explain 6 weeks of careful planning behind my back." Nobody finished their dinner that night. Derek left first, red-faced and silent, muttering something about needing air. Claire stayed at the table long after Tyler had gone up to his old bedroom, staring at her hands, and for a long while neither of us said anything at all. "What happens now?" she finally asked. "Now," I said, "I talk to my attorney about what protections I need going forward. And you and I figure out, separately from your husband, whether there's anything left here worth rebuilding." Walter met with me 2 days later, and by then I'd brought him the recorder, my notebook, and copies of everything Priscilla at the realty office had been willing to share. He listened to the recording twice, his expression growing more serious each time. "This is enough to be taken very seriously," he said. "Not necessarily enough to press criminal charges, not yet, but enough to protect yourself completely going forward. Here's what I recommend, Edward. First, we file a report with Adult Protective Services, not to punish anyone, but to create an official record. If anything like this ever surfaces again, from Derek or anyone else, there will already be documentation on file. Second, we set up an irrevocable trust for the house, naming you as the sole beneficiary during your lifetime, which makes it essentially impossible for anyone to sell or transfer the property without your direct, personal involvement, no matter what power of attorney documents might exist. And third, I want you evaluated by an independent physician, purely for your own protection, to have clear, dated medical documentation of your mental competency on record." "You think that's necessary?" I asked. "Getting evaluated, like there's a real question about it?" "I think," Walter said carefully, "that people who are willing to plan a nursing home placement 6 weeks before an incident even happens are people capable of trying more than one approach if the first one fails. I'd rather you have that documentation sitting ready in a drawer and never need it, than need it someday and not have it." He turned out to be right sooner than either of us expected. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived from a physician I didn't recognize, a Dr. Sheila Ransom, requesting that I schedule what she called a routine wellness and cognitive screening, citing a referral from a concerned family member. I called the office directly, and after some careful questions, I learned that Derek had contacted the practice personally, describing a pattern of what he called increasing confusion and memory lapses that, as far as I could tell, existed nowhere except inside whatever narrative he was now trying to build. I called Walter immediately. "This is exactly the kind of move I was worried about," he said, not sounding especially surprised. "If Derek can get a physician to document concerns about your cognitive state, even minor ones, it strengthens any future attempt to argue you weren't fully competent when you resisted signing that power of attorney. It could even become the foundation for a guardianship petition down the road, if things escalated that far." He'd actually try to have me declared incompetent? I asked, the idea landing somewhere between disbelief and a cold, creeping fear I hadn't fully let myself feel until that moment. "Some people will try almost anything once they've convinced themselves the end justifies it," Walter said. "The good news, Edward, is that you're already ahead of him. Go to that appointment. Go willingly, cooperatively, and let's make sure the physician performing the actual evaluation is someone I trust completely, rather than someone whose referral came preloaded with a version of events written by Derek." I sat with that letter for a long time that evening, turning it over in my hands, thinking about the fact that my own son-in-law was apparently willing to manufacture a medical narrative about my mind in order to get his hands on my house. I thought about Margaret again, about the vows I'd made her, not just to love our daughter but to protect what we'd built together for her, and I understood, finally, fully, that protecting it now might mean protecting it from the very family I'd built it for. The independent evaluation, arranged through a geriatric specialist Walter trusted named Dr. Amara Whitfield, took place 2 weeks later. It lasted nearly 3 hours, memory tests, reasoning exercises, questions about my finances and daily routines that I answered without hesitation, because there was, simply, nothing wrong with my mind to hide. "Mr. Halloway," Dr. Whitfield told me afterward, "I want to be direct with you. Your cognitive function is entirely consistent with a healthy 71-year-old man. There is no evidence whatsoever of the kind of decline that would raise any legitimate concern about your competency to manage your own affairs. I'll be putting that in writing, in detail, for your records." I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized had been wound so tight. Derek's attempt to schedule his own version of that evaluation, through Dr. Ransom's office, never got the chance to move forward. Once my attorney sent Dr. Ransom's practice a formal notice, along with a copy of Dr. Whitfield's competency evaluation and a clear statement that any future contact regarding my medical care needed to go through me directly, the referral quietly disappeared from their system altogether. The Adult Protective Services caseworker who came to interview me was a calm, thorough woman named Denise Okafor, who spent nearly 2 hours going through everything I'd documented, the recording, the realty office visit, the timeline of the fall versus the timeline of Derek's outreach to a listing agent, and finally the letter from Dr. Ransom's office. "Mr. Halloway," she said, closing her folder at the end of our conversation, "I want you to understand something clearly. What you're describing is a well-documented pattern in cases of attempted elder financial exploitation. The early outreach to a realtor, followed by pressure to sign broad legal authority, followed by an attempt to establish a medical narrative of incapacity when the first approach met resistance. That's a recognizable sequence, unfortunately, and you handled it about as well as anyone could have. We'll be keeping this on file. If your son-in-law attempts anything similar again, whether toward you or, frankly, toward anyone else in the future, this documentation will matter." "Will anything happen to him?" I asked. "Legally, I mean." "That depends on what you want to pursue," Denise said. "Given that no money actually changed hands and no fraudulent documents were ultimately signed, criminal charges would be difficult and, honestly, might do more damage to your family than good. But you have every right to pursue a formal cease and desist regarding any further attempts to access your finances or property, and your attorney can help you file that. Sometimes the most powerful outcome in cases like this isn't punishment. It's simply making absolutely certain the door that was almost open gets permanently and thoroughly closed." I thought about that conversation for a long time afterward. I hadn't wanted revenge against Derek, not really, not the way some part of me might have expected to want it. I wanted my house safe. I wanted my mind respected. And more than either of those things, I wanted to understand what had actually happened to my daughter, the little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest during summer thunderstorms, to end up standing in a dining room defending a scheme built on a lie to her own father. Claire came to see me alone, 3 days after that dinner, without Derek, for the first time in longer than I could remember. "I need you to understand something," she said, sitting across from me at the same kitchen table, looking smaller somehow than she had in years. "Derek and I have been struggling for a long time, Dad. Financially. He lost a lot of money in a business investment 2 years ago that I only fully understood the size of a few months back. I think somewhere along the way, worrying about your fall became tangled up with worrying about our own situation, and I let myself believe the two things were more connected than they actually were. That doesn't excuse it. I know that doesn't excuse it. But I need you to know it wasn't really about wanting you gone, or wanting you unsafe. It was about being scared of our own future and finding what felt like an easy answer. Easy answers that involve your father's house rarely stay easy for long," I said, but I said it gently, because underneath the anger I'd been carrying for weeks, I could see how tired she looked, how much this had clearly been costing her too, in ways I hadn't fully considered while I was busy protecting myself. "I know," she said. "I've asked Derek to move out while we figure some things out. I can't keep untangling what's actually best for you from what's convenient for our bank account. I should have been able to see that difference from the very beginning, and the fact that I couldn't scares me more than almost anything else in all of this." I reached across the table and took her hand, the way I used to when she was small and scared of storms. "I'm not interested in losing my daughter over this, Claire. I am interested in never again wondering whether the person visiting me on a Tuesday afternoon is here because she loves me or because she needs something from me. Those need to be two very different things going forward." "They will be," she said. "I promise you, Dad. They will be." I wanted to believe her completely, and some part of me did. But I had also learned, over the past 2 months, that promises alone hadn't been enough to keep my name off a realtor's client list 6 weeks before anyone bothered to ask my permission. So I told her, honestly and without cruelty, that trust was something we'd be rebuilding slowly, one visit at a time, rather than something I could simply hand back over in a single conversation. She nodded, and for the first time since the fall on those porch steps, I saw something like real relief on her face rather than calculation. Derek called me exactly once after that dinner, about a week later, his voice carrying the particular defensiveness of a man who has decided, somewhere in his own mind, that he is the one who has been wronged. "I think you're overreacting to all of this, Edward," he said, without much preamble. "Everything I did because I care about this family's stability. You're going to alienate your own daughter over some paperwork that never even got signed." "Derek," I said, keeping my voice level, "you contacted a physician's office and asked them to document concerns about my cognitive state that don't exist, 3 weeks after I declined to sign a document without my own attorney reviewing it first. That's not stability. That's a man trying to build a case against his father-in-law's mind because his first plan didn't move fast enough." "I was trying to protect this family's future," he said, his voice rising slightly. "You have no idea what kind of financial pressure we've been under. That house sitting there, half empty, with just you rattling around in it, while we struggle to keep our own home, did you ever think about that? Did you ever once think about what your daughter's actually going through?" And there it was, finally, spoken plainly instead of dressed up in language about safety and wellness checks and Pine Ridge's convenient opening. It had never really been about a fall on the porch steps at all. "I think about my daughter every single day, Derek," I said. "I think about her enough that I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure nobody, including her own husband, ever gets to treat her father's home and mind as a solution to somebody else's financial mistakes again. That's not overreacting. That's finally understanding exactly what I almost let happen." He didn't have much to say after that, and the call ended shortly afterward, the last real conversation the two of us would have for a long while. The irrevocable trust Walter helped me establish was finalized the following month, protecting the house completely for as long as I lived in it, structured in a way that made it legally impossible for anyone, family or otherwise, to sell or transfer it without my direct, documented, independent consent. I kept Dr. Whitfield's competency evaluation in a fireproof lockbox alongside my will, along with copies of everything Denise Okafor's office had on file, a small, careful archive of a season in my life I never wanted to relive but never wanted to forget the lessons of either. Tyler stayed close through all of it, more than either of his parents did, in some ways. He came by most weekends that fall, sometimes to help with yard work, sometimes just to sit on the back porch and talk, and I watched, with a kind of quiet pride I hadn't expected, as a 19-year-old boy grew a little more into the kind of man who says the hard, honest thing at a dinner table rather than staying quiet to keep the peace. "I keep thinking about that night," he told me one Saturday afternoon, months later, while we worked together clearing leaves out of the same gutters that had started this whole thing. "About how easily I almost believed what Mom and Dad told me. If I hadn't happened to mention the condo listings that day, would you have found out in time?" "I'd like to think so," I said. "But I'm awfully glad I didn't have to find out the hard way whether that was true." "I'm proud of you, Grandpa," he said, a little shy about it, the way young men often are about saying something that plainly. "For not just going along with it. A lot of people your age probably would have, especially against their own kid." "I almost did," I admitted. For about one evening, sitting in my study, listening through that heating vent, some part of me wanted to just believe the easiest version of the story, that my daughter loved me and wanted what was best for me, full stop, no complications. It would have been simpler to believe that. It just wouldn't have been true. Claire and I rebuilt our relationship slowly over the months that followed, the way Walter had warned me it would likely have to happen, not through one dramatic conversation, but through 100 small ordinary ones. Sunday dinners resumed, cautiously at first, then with a little more ease as the weeks accumulated into something like trust again. She never brought Derek to those dinners, not for a long while, and eventually she told me, quietly and without much drama, that they had decided to separate for good. "I don't think I can build a marriage back on top of what he tried to do to you," she told me one evening, months after that first difficult dinner. "I keep asking myself how I let it get that far, how I let myself go along with it even partway. I don't have a good answer, Dad, except that fear makes people willing to believe things they'd never believe with a clear head." "I understand fear better than I used to," I told her. "I spent 2 months learning exactly how far it can push a person, in both directions. I'm just grateful yours eventually pushed you back toward me instead of further away. I think about that season often now, more than a year removed from the night I first heard my own daughter's voice through a heating vent, discussing my future like it belonged to someone else entirely. I think about how close I came to signing my name to a document I never should have signed, simply because I trusted the people handing it to me more than I trusted my own instincts. I don't regret the recorder in my shirt pocket, or the notebook by my bed, or the long, uncomfortable months of documenting my own family instead of simply believing them. I understand now that protecting yourself and loving your family aren't opposites, no matter how much it might feel that way in the moment. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for the people you love, is refuse to hand over what's yours simply because someone you trust is asking you to, quickly, quietly, before you have the chance to think it all the way through. My house still stands the way Margaret and I built it, all those years ago. My name is still the only one on the deed. And on Sunday evenings now, when Claire and Tyler come for dinner, the conversation in that kitchen is finally, once again, just about family, no folders, no pens already clicked open, no timelines whispered through heating vents. Just a father, a daughter, and a grandson, slowly, carefully, learning how to trust each other again, one honest Sunday at a time. There's a part of this story I haven't told yet, one I've thought about more than almost any other piece of it. About 6 weeks into everything, before the dinner where the recorder finally came out of my pocket, I drove out to the cemetery where Margaret is buried, and I sat on the small stone bench near her grave for the better part of an hour, trying to figure out what she would have wanted me to do. Margaret had always been the braver one between us, in the quiet, stubborn way some people are brave without ever raising their voice. She was the one who insisted, back when Claire was 17 and furious about a curfew, that love sometimes looks like holding a line even when your child hates you for it in the moment. I'd forgotten that lesson somewhere over the years, softened by grief and by the particular loneliness of growing old in a house that used to be full of noise and now mostly wasn't. I don't know if I can do this to her, I told the headstone, feeling foolish and not caring, the way I'd felt sitting with Eleanor's memory in another man's story, though I didn't know that story yet, of course. I only knew my own. She's still my little girl, Margaret, even now, even with everything I overheard. I don't know how to protect myself from her without it feeling like I'm the one betraying something. I didn't get an answer, not the kind you can point to, not a sign in the clouds or a sudden certainty settling over me. But I sat there long enough that the answer eventually arrived anyway, quietly, the way most real answers do. Protecting myself wasn't a betrayal of my daughter. It was the last, best thing I could do for the version of her I still believed was in there somewhere, buried under fear and financial pressure and a husband whose plans had outpaced her own conscience. If I let this happen without resistance, I wouldn't be saving our relationship. I'd simply be handing her a mistake so large neither of us would ever fully recover from it. I drove home from that cemetery that afternoon and called Walter the very same day. The finalizing of the trust took place in Walter's office on a gray Thursday morning in November, nearly 4 months after that first overheard conversation through the heating vent. Claire came with me, which surprised me, given everything that had happened between us by then. I wanted to be here, she said, sitting quietly in the corner of Walter's office while the paperwork was reviewed line by line. Not because I need to be part of the decision, Dad. I don't. This is entirely yours to make, and honestly, it should be. I wanted to be here because I think I need to sit with exactly what almost happened, in a room where it's being permanently prevented from ever happening again. I think I need that, for my own sake, as much as for yours. Walter read through the trust documents slowly, explaining each provision in plain language, the protections against unauthorized sale, the requirements for my direct, witnessed consent for any future transfer, the built-in safeguards that would make it nearly impossible for anyone, family or otherwise, to repeat what had almost happened that fall. This is about as airtight as these things get, Walter told me, sliding the final page across his desk for my signature. Edward, you should feel good about this. Not because you had to build these walls in the first place, but because you did it carefully, thoroughly, and with a clear head, even after everything you'd just been through. I signed my name, the same signature Claire had once traced with her small finger as a little girl, learning her letters at that same kitchen table where, months earlier, she'd slid a folder across to me with a pen already clicked open. This time, the signature belonged entirely to me, given freely, understood completely, protecting exactly what I intended it to protect. Claire cried quietly in the corner of that office, and when I asked her why, she said, "Because I'm glad you're safe, Dad. And because I'm ashamed it took all of this for me to be the daughter who's glad about that, instead of the daughter who almost made you unsafe in the first place." I didn't have a perfect response to that. Some wounds in a family don't close all at once, no matter how sincere the apology or how thorough the legal protections. But I reached over and took her hand again, the way I had that first difficult afternoon at the kitchen table, and I told her the truth, plainly, the way I'd learned to tell the truth over these past several difficult months. "I'm glad you're here, in this room, understanding what almost happened instead of just moving past it," I said. "That matters more to me than any apology could. Understanding is what actually keeps something like this from happening twice." Tyler graduated the following spring, and the whole family sat together at the ceremony, Claire, myself, even, cautiously, Derek, who had by then moved into a small apartment across town and was, according to Tyler, working seriously on understanding what he'd nearly cost all of us. I didn't forgive Derek completely that day, and I'm not certain I ever fully will, but I found I no longer needed to carry active anger toward him either. He'd shown me, clearly and unmistakably, exactly who he was capable of becoming under financial pressure, and I'd built the protections I needed as a result. That, in the end, felt like enough. Watching Tyler walk across that stage, I thought about how strange it was that the entire ordeal had started with a single overheard sentence through a heating vent, and had ended, more than a year later, with my family gathered together again, imperfect and still healing, but present, honest, and no longer hiding folders with pens already clicked open behind anyone's back. I am 72 years old now. I still live in the house Margaret and I built together, the deed still carrying only my name, the trust sitting safely in Walter's files should I ever need to lean on its protections again. I still drive myself to church on Sundays. I still balance my own checkbook. And most Sunday evenings, my daughter and my grandson sit at my kitchen table again, the way they used to before any of this happened, the conversation finally, blessedly, just about ordinary things, Tyler's new job, Claire's garden, the weather, nothing more complicated than that. I think, sometimes, about how easily this could have gone the other way. How easily I could have signed that folder the first weekend Claire brought it to me, trusting the people I loved simply because I loved them, without ever knowing what had already been set in motion weeks before my own fall gave anyone a convenient excuse. I think about all the families who never happen to overhear the right conversation through the right heating vent at the right moment, who sign the folder, who trust the timeline they're given, who lose the home and the independence and sometimes even the family itself, all under the careful, well-intentioned sounding language of safety and stability. I got lucky, in a strange way, that a floor vent carried sound clearly enough for an old man to overhear his own future being decided without him. But I don't think it was only luck that carried me through the months that followed. It was refusing to let fear, my own fear of losing my daughter, and hers, apparently, of losing her financial footing, make the decision for either of us before either of us had the chance to face it honestly. My daughter and I are rebuilding something now, slower and more careful than what we had before, but more honest too, I think, than it might have ever been if none of this had happened at all. Sometimes the hardest kind of love is the kind that says no, not yet, not like this, even to the people who raised you or the people you raised yourself. I said no to my daughter once, at a moment when everything in me wanted to simply trust her and sign. It was, I believe now, the most loving thing I have ever done for either one of us. There's a small ritual I've kept, in the years since all of this settled into something calmer. Every Sunday morning before church, I walk out onto that same back porch, past the same second step that started everything, and I stand there for a minute or two before I leave, just looking at the house Margaret and I built together, still standing, still mine, still full of the ordinary, unremarkable safety I nearly lost without ever fully understanding how close I'd come. I think about Denise Okafor sometimes, and the quiet, matter-of-fact way she described the pattern I'd stumbled into without a name for it, the early outreach, the pressure to sign, the manufactured medical narrative when the first attempt stalled. I think about how many other families, in how many other kitchens, are living through some version of that same sequence right now, an aging parent slowly being maneuvered toward a signature they don't fully understand, dressed up in language about safety and love that sounds, on its surface, almost impossible to argue with. I don't have any grand advice for those families, except the same advice Walter gave me on that first difficult phone call. Slow down. Ask your own questions. Get your own attorney, even when, especially when, the people asking for your trust are the people you love the most. Love and exploitation can wear remarkably similar clothing sometimes, and the only real way to tell them apart is to take the time nobody in a hurry ever wants you to take. Claire asked me once, not long ago, sitting at that same kitchen table on an ordinary Sunday evening, whether I'd ever truly forgiven her for how close she'd let things get. I think forgiveness isn't a single door you walk through once, I told her. I think it's more like this house, sweetheart. You don't just build it and walk away. You keep showing up to take care of it, season after season, and some years the roof needs mending and some years it doesn't, but you keep showing up either way. That's what we're doing now, I think. Showing up. That's its own kind of forgiveness, even on the days when the word itself feels too big to say out loud. She reached across the table, the way she had that first difficult afternoon, and this time, for the first time in a long while, I didn't have to think twice before taking her hand. The heating vent in my study still carries sound the same way it always has, up through the floorboards from the room below. I hear ordinary things through it these days, Tyler laughing at something on television, Claire humming while she does the dishes, the small unremarkable noise of a family simply being a family again, with nothing hidden underneath any of it anymore. I've come to think of that vent, strangely, as something like a gift rather than the accident that nearly cost me everything. It gave me the truth when I needed it most, even if I never asked for it, even if I would have given almost anything, in that first terrible moment, not to have heard it at all. I built a life once, plank by plank, decision by decision, the ordinary way most people build a life, a job I showed up to for 30 years, a marriage I never stopped being grateful for, a daughter I would have handed anything to without a second thought. I nearly handed her everything, quite literally, on a Tuesday afternoon with a folder and a pen already clicked open. I'm glad, now, that some quiet, stubborn part of me refused to sign before I understood exactly what I was signing away. That refusal cost me a difficult season with my daughter. It cost her marriage entirely. It cost all of us a version of easy trust we may never fully get back to exactly the way it was before. But it also gave us something we didn't have before any of this happened, a family built on honesty instead of assumption, on documented understanding instead of blind faith, on love that finally, clearly, knows the difference between protecting someone and simply believing whatever they tell you. I am, in the end, still just an old man in the house he built with his late wife, still balancing his own checkbook, still driving himself to church on Sunday mornings. But I am that man with his name still on the deed, his mind still respected, and his daughter, slowly and honestly, finding her way back home.